We are live from the George Washington University here in the nation's capital for a CNN Town Hall event with Senator Bernie Sanders. Hello, I'm Chris Cuomo. I want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. We're being seen on CNN, of course, but also CNN en Espanol and CNN International. Our servicemen and women are watching on the American Forces Network. Thank you for your service. And welcome to those listening on the Westwood One Radio Network and CNN Channel 116 on Sirius XM. Now, tonight kicks off a special week of programming on CNN to mark an historic transition of power. Donald Trump, 11 days away from being sworn in as the 45th president of the United States and leader of the free world. It is a pivotal moment for our country. So, on Thursday night, House Speaker Paul Ryan will be on this very stage to explain how he will help enact the Trump agenda. Tonight, we're going to hear from one of the most influential members of the opposition, Senator Bernie Sanders. We've invited people from around the world to ask Senator Sanders questions. We have reviewed the questions to make sure we cover a variety of important issues. As Senator Sanders likes to say, it will be a serious conversation about serious issues. Now, please welcome former presidential candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont.
Thank you.
I feel like we were just here. I feel like we were just doing this. You, me, on a stage, you talking to the people, making the case for what your party has to offer.
Yeah.
You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. I didn't anticipate that answer.
Let me begin by thanking CNN. It's not going to be a filibuster, don't worry. Thanking CNN for hosting the event, because what I wanted to do is to have, as Chris just said, a serious discussion about the issues impacting the American people, issues which very often do not get the attention that they deserve. And I hope we can do that tonight. Chris, thanks so much.
Absolutely.
For having me.
Our pleasure, and good for you for taking the opportunity. In the introduction, I don't know if you were listening, I referred to you as the opposition, the Democratic Party as opposing the incoming administration. Are you comfortable with that description?
Well, historically, you have a dominant party in power, and the opposition. That exists here, that exists all over the world. That means that the responsibility of the opposition party is to make constructive criticism where we disagree, and to come up with alternative ideas as to how we can improve the lives of the American people.
Does that take shape the way it did with the GOP over the last 8 years?
I hope not. What the GOP did, literally on the day that President Obama was inaugurated, is sit down and they say, okay, our strategy is going to be that we will obstruct. We will do everything that we can to make sure that he accomplishes as little as possible. And then we'll go to the American people and say, see, this guy didn't accomplish anything. Vote for us. No, I don't think that's what we do. I think where Trump has ideas that make sense, that we can work with him on, I think we should. But I will tell you this. He ran a campaign whose cornerstone was bigotry. It was based on sexism, on racism, on xenophobia. And on that issue, I personally will not compromise. He ran a campaign which denied the reality of climate change at a time when virtually all of the scientists who have studied this issue tell us we face a planetary crisis, and we've got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. We can't compromise on that issue.
So we'll deal with the issues and where you see space to be together and where you feel you must be apart. News of day question. Do you accept the intelligence community's assessment of Russia's involvement in motivating the hacks during the election? And how do you understand the president-elect's resistance to that analysis?
Yes, I do agree with the intelligence communities. They are virtually unanimous. I think the evidence is overwhelming. And we should be clear, this is not just the first time they've done it, and I suspect they're working on other efforts as well in other countries around the world. This was a way for them to help elect a candidate of their choice, Mr. Trump. And I think it was also an effort to try to undermine in a significant way American democracy. So I think the evidence is very clear that Russia did play a very harmful role, unacceptable role, and it's something that we have got to deal with. I think what Mr. Trump appears to be saying is that, no, it's not true, it's not accurate, I don't trust the intelligence committees, and I think that is an unfortunate position to hold.
It was explained to me this morning that the media makes the mistake with the president-elect of putting too much weight on what he says and that we miss what is in his heart.
I mean, that may be true, but think about that statement for a moment. You're not a heart surgeon. You can't know what's in somebody's heart. Generally speaking, we accept that when somebody says something, they mean it. And we have a right to accept that on face value. And let me say something, it will sound rude and it will sound partisan.
Is it directed at me?
No.
Then I'm okay with it.
And that is one of the problems that all of us have, including the media. And I am not the only person to say this. There are Republicans who say this. We are dealing with a man who in many respects is, how can I phrase this, a pathological liar. And I say that without any, look, I have many conservative friends and I disagree with them. They're not liars. They have their point of view. But time after time after time, he says stuff which is blatantly, absolutely untrue.
The man was elected by the American people. He's the next president of the United States. You're comfortable with that description?
That's a reality. But on the other hand, you've asked the question, how do we deal with that? And I think we have got to figure out a way to deal with that. But that is a very difficult issue to deal with.
Stock market's up. Companies are keeping jobs here. People call it the Trump effect. Maybe not everybody sees him that way.
Well, how people may see it or not, all I am saying is what I think is a fact. And that's just not me who is saying this time. I mean, Trump began his campaign by saying that he saw Muslims in New Jersey on a rooftop. He saw on television them celebrating the destruction of the Twin Towers. Nobody else in the world happened to see that. He announced just maybe a month ago that millions of people, he would have won the popular vote, which he lost by almost 3 million votes to Secretary Clinton. He would have won it if millions of people had not voted illegally. Nobody believes that. Nobody. Not Republicans, Democrats, nobody.
So that's how we got here. Let's talk about how we go forward. I want you to meet Jessica Karabian. She's from Pennsylvania. She was diagnosed 2 years ago with an incurable breast cancer. She's with us tonight to ask you about Obamacare, which President-elect Trump, as you know, says he's going to repeal on day one. Jessica, thank you for taking the energy to come here tonight. I know it's very important to you. What's your question?
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you for having me, Senator Sanders. When I was 29 years old, I was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. My daughter was just 8 months old, and I followed the recommended treatments by my doctors, and I was given a 97% survival rate. And a year later, I was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, which is an incurable cancer. I quickly became a terminal patient at the age of 30, and I rely greatly on the Affordable Care Act. My fear, I'm terrified that the Republicans will repeal the Affordable Care Act, and which would mean that insurance companies will once again be allowed to deny patients with pre-existing conditions, and that's me. And that's a life or a death issue for I have a daughter and a husband. And my question to you, Senator, is how will you steer the Republican Party into keeping the life-saving components of Obamacare?
Well, Jessica, thanks so much for being with us, and I'm sure I speak for everybody wishing you the best of luck in your treatments. We forget that it was only 8 years ago, 7 years ago, where somebody who had breast cancer, somebody who had other serious illness, could go to an insurance company and they would say, why would we want to insure you? You're going to cost us a fortune. You're sick. We can't make money out of you. And the American people said that that is insane. What's the function of insurance if you can't get it when you need it? But that's what went on. And as a result of the Affordable Care Act, we said to the insurance companies, no, you can't discriminate against somebody for a pre-existing condition. And we said many other things. I suspect, tell me if I'm wrong, you're probably running up a pretty steep medical bill, yeah?
Huge.
All right. And it used to be there were caps on what the insurance companies would pay. We'll pay you $100,000. We won't pay more. Well, how do I pay the next $100,000? Tough luck. You're on your own. We changed that as well. So I understand. To answer your question, Jessica, I am going to do everything that I can, and I believe I speak for virtually every member of the Democratic caucus, that we're going to do everything that we can to improve the Affordable Care Act. It has problems, but we damn well are not going to see it repealed and have no replacement there at all. And let me just conclude by saying this, and a lot of Americans don't know this. We are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a right. If you were in other major countries, you would not be having to deal with this issue. Comprehensive health care to all people. And by the way, because they don't have private insurance companies ripping them off, or they don't have the pharmaceutical industry ripping off the people because they negotiate prices, the cost per capita in every other country is significantly lower than it is in the United States. So, Jessica, I wish you the very best, and you hang in there. Thank you so much for being here and expressing your concern for your fellow Americans.
Thank you.
Quick follow. Trump has said that he intends to keep pre-existing conditions and some of the other protections that are in Obamacare. Do you believe that? And is that a good starting point for the Democrats to work with?
Here's the problem.
GOP?
He says that he will, and we will see. Other Republicans are not so sure. And the other thing is that we don't talk about a lot, is that the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, the complete repeal, would not only do away with the protection for pre-existing conditions, not only throw 20 million people off of Medicaid, not only raise prescription drug prices for seniors, not only do away with Medicare as we know it and privatize it, and I know Paul Ryan is going to be on soon.
Thursday.
You might want to talk to Paul about that, because that's his idea. But it would also give huge tax breaks to the very wealthiest people in this country. They want to repeal that aspect. So there's a limit to what you can do in preserving the quote-unquote good parts if you don't continue to raise the kinds of revenue you need from the wealthy.
Next issue. Meet Ed Mash, recently retired from his union job with the Department of Corrections in Nelsonville, Ohio. Lifelong Democrat, but voted for Donald Trump. What's your question, Ed? Thanks for joining us.
My question tonight, Senator Sanders, is I'm from a small town in Appalachia where we had coal and factories, and today all that is gone. I mean, people are looking at, there's not very many good job opportunities out there in these areas, and areas like mine. And you and Mr. Trump both campaigned on bringing jobs back to rural communities like this. And I like this when both of you spoke on this and campaigned on that fact and everything. However, maybe it's time to lay the politics aside, and are you willing to work with Mr. Trump to see that this happens?
Absolutely. And there's an area where you're right. Trump and I talked about many of the same issues. And here's what the issue is. The issue is that for the last 30 years, under Democratic and Republican administrations, we have had trade policies like NAFTA and CAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China, which were written essentially by large multinational corporations. Those are the guys who wrote it. And what they said is, why do we want to pay a worker in America 15 or 20 bucks an hour, 30 bucks an hour? We could shut down here and go to China, go to Mexico, pay people a few bucks an hour. That was the goal of those trade agreements, and it succeeded, Ed. We have lost millions of decent paying jobs, and I know Kentucky, West Virginia, that whole region, but the whole country has been significantly hurt. What do I believe? I believe we need a new trade policy. I believe we tell corporate America that they got to control their greed. They can't throw American workers out on the street who made them wealthy and then move to Mexico and pay people a few bucks an hour. So if Mr. Trump is prepared to sit down and work on a new trade policy, which is based on fairness, not just on corporate greed, yeah, I will be happy to work with him.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed. You have one head that's shaking up and down with a lot of energy, and it comes from Tiana Dowdell, because what you're talking about right now, she hails from Troy, Michigan. She's a Democrat. She voted for you in the primary, voted for Clinton in November. This issue, NAFTA, goes to the core of her question. What do you have, Tiana?
My dad worked at American Axle for 24 years in skilled trades before he lost his job to NAFTA, and it was sent to Mexico. I am currently an assembly worker at General Motors Detroit Hamtramck Assembly Plant, and I'm worried about my job. Bernie, you and Donald Trump both agreed to get rid of NAFTA. As a senator, what steps will you take to work with the Trump administration to abolish NAFTA?
Well, as I just told Ed, we have lost, Deanna, millions. Millions. It's not only your dead. We have lost millions of decent paying jobs. One of the reasons that the middle class in this country is shrinking is there was a time when people can go out and get a job in a factory. If they had a decent union, they could earn good wages, good benefits. And as a result of these disastrous trade agreements, written again by corporate America, American workers, with total contempt, were thrown out on the streets. Many of these workers are now working for 50, 60% of what they used to work. So yes, I will work with Mr. Trump. I will work with anybody who wants to work together to develop a trade policy which tells corporate America they have to look beyond their greed. You know, they got to look at the needs of the American people. I want to see us rebuild our manufacturing sector, create decent paying jobs here. The world has changed. Automation is also having an impact. But I don't think you could be a great nation if you're not producing a lot of what we consume. We can't get everything from China and Mexico. You know, occasionally you got to buy a product made in the United States of America. So I will work very hard, not only with regard to NAFTA, but with regard to PNTR with China, to transform our trade policies.
Let's push on this. I mean, there is a similarity between Trump's message and yours, and there's no question that it hits at the heart a lot of people's anxieties. But, you know, Joe Biden just said, the vice president, he likes Bernie Sanders. He said he doesn't think 500 billionaires are behind every problem that America has. And you mentioned automation, but quickly. And when economists talk about this, Senator, they talk about it first and they almost stop there, that the reason we've lost manufacturing jobs isn't because of one trade deal, it's because of automation, it's innovation.
No.
And
it's
that's
a combination.
why they say you've lost the job.
Chris, no, I think most of the serious students of the issue think it's a combination of factors. But there is no doubt, I think, in any objective economist's mind, and I've read these studies, we have lost millions and millions of decent paying jobs as a result of trade agreements. Automation is also a serious problem. Factories now can produce more with fewer workers. That's true.
Right, it's not a problem, it's a reality.
It's a reality.
How you deal with that reality.
Well,
how
it's
do you
a problem.
train workers for the next generation?
It is a problem for the worker who has been replaced by a machine. But I think we need to change the culture of this country. And we cannot allow corporate America to make every decision just based on their bottom line, even with automation. If automation can replace jobs, do we just throw those workers out on the street? Or do we have an obligation to retrain them for other jobs, to provide extended unemployment and educational opportunities? We just cannot allow this culture of corporate greed, which results in the very, very rich becoming much richer, a middle class shrinking, and 43 million people living in poverty. Somebody has got to stand up to these billionaires and say, you know what, enough is enough. You cannot have it all. I want an economy that belongs to all of us, works for all of us. People forget, Chris, we are the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. And our job now is to create a government which represents all of the people, not just the 1%.
So you're talking about a very important message here. Let's bring in Roey Goldstein. He's a senior at the George Washington University, and he's studying international affairs. He's from upstate New York, voted for Clinton. He's got a question about messaging and the future of our economy. What do you have?
So along these lines, I'm a moderate Democrat who is discouraged a little bit by how much blame you put towards upper income households and trade agreements for our country's problems. So how can Democrats reframe their economic message in order to address the concerns of average Americans without demonizing top earners or moderate or alienating moderate Democrats?
Roy is your first name? Roy?
Roy,
No.
yep.
Roey.
Oh, Roey, I'm sorry. Roey, I don't demonize anybody. What I try to do is state the facts. And the facts are, in my view, that corporate greed is destroying our economy and is doing incalculable harm to the working families of this country. And I think, as somebody who is trying to reform the Democratic Party, this coming Sunday, we're going to have 30 rallies all over this country in opposition to the Republican effort to try to end the Affordable Care Act. We're trying to create grassroots activity within the Democratic Party. It's not a question of demonizing. It's a question of creating public policies, tax policies. Do you think it makes sense? Do you think it makes sense that we give very, very large tax breaks to billionaires and then cut back on education or healthcare? Does that make sense to you?
No.
Well, it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to the vast majority of the American people. So I'm not demonizing people. What I am saying is that the billionaire class has enormous power. They wrote the trade policies. You got people sitting at the top of the pharmaceutical industry who last year, the top 5 drug companies made $50 billion in profits. Well, the average American cannot afford the medicine he or she needs. Am I demonizing, or is that a fact? I think what we need is to bring the American people together and tell those people that we want a government that works for everybody. That's what I'm trying to do.
This is your opportunity. What do you got, Roey? Bernie's laying out his case there as the senator. What do you have? You said you don't like it. Tell him what you don't like about that.
Well, particularly international trade, I think that most studies show that international trade, free trade agreements, NAFTA especially, has a net benefit on the economy. I mean, we have lost a lot of jobs to NAFTA, but there are now 7 million jobs that rely on NAFTA. If you scrap NAFTA, you essentially take those jobs away too.
It's not a question of scrapping. It's a question of rewriting. It's creating a new trade policy. Look, studies will tell you this and studies will tell you that. I read a lot of these studies. I think the objective evidence is that NAFTA and PNTR, even more than NAFTA, has in fact, in a net sense, of course you're right, some of these trade policies create jobs. But overall, when you add them up, we have lost millions of jobs. And by the way, it's not just job loss. What else goes on? What goes on is you have many employers who walk into their workers' union hall or just talk to their employees. They say, look, here's your choice. We're going to cut your health care benefits. We're going to cut your wages. And if you don't like it, guess what we're doing? We're moving to China. That's your choice. And that is another reason why the middle class in this country has been in decline while wages are going down for many workers. So I think you and I have a disagreement about trade policies, but that's what democracy is about.
This is good. I'm going to take a break right now so you can get up here and finish this conversation. We're going to take a quick break here. We're with Senator Sanders. How's it going so far? Are we happy with the discussion? I think we could do a little bit better. We've got a big moment coming up in this first test of how the Democrats work with the Republicans. You've got the big nominating hearings that are going to go on. Will the Democrats confirm the choices? What's going to happen when we start getting the first